Everybody, how much do you know about the 767 fuel system? God, I hate the way I do this. Okay, so this is GSI Guy. If you haven't been here before, check out the link. I've got some other videos that you can check out. Currently, we're going over 767 systems. And today, we are going to be going over some fuel systems. If you've been with me a couple other videos, you'll notice sound quality might not be as good. I got myself a new microphone, so hopefully this will work out a little bit better. Last few times, we've been doing these videos where I've been basically doing a PowerPoint like I would in a class, and I know it might be boring for some people, but it allows me to kind of get the information out in a little bit more organized way than what it was before when I was just doing it inside the aircraft on X-Plane. Like I said, today we're just going to go over 767 fuel system. Shouldn't be too terribly long. It's about 13 slides. I'll try and talk fast. Not too fast, though, as always. Again, this is going to be on the Google Drive as well. It'll be available to be able to download and to be able to have the notes and stuff that are associated with it. Right now, it's, fuel system, IRS, hydraulics. I think we've got all of those listed on there so far. So if you want any kind of handouts, any kind of like extra material, or even if you listen to this video and you're like, that didn't sound bad, but I forget what he said about a certain thing, you can go download the PowerPoint. It's got all the notes in it that I've put into it. And yeah, you can check it all out that way. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing when we start talking about the fuel system is what our controls are. So inside the airplane, you'll notice there is a panel that's going to have some pump switches located on it, and those pump switches are going to be corresponding to where they are located inside the airplane. As far as this panel, it is going to have four main pump switches. It's got left, aft and forward, right, aft and forward, and then your center pumps here down at the bottom. And then it's going to have two cross-feed valves or one cross-feed valve. It all depends on what your airplane was bought with. If your airplane was bought with two cross-feed valves, awesome. If your airplane was bought with one cross-feed valve, it'll work, but there's a couple extra steps you have to do. Now, where that actually comes into play is only really in ETOPS, and if you don't know what ETOPS is when we're talking about this, it's could mean a couple different things. The joke is engine turn or people swim, but it really stands for extended twin engine operation. I think now it's just changed to extended ops. Basically, you are far away from land, you're over water, and you don't want to lose your engines. That's the biggest thing. It's really for two engine airplanes. That's what it started out with. The airplane I came from was a KC-135. It's a four-engine airplane. I had never heard of ETOPS before. And then we get into the 7.6, and I'm like, what is this? What is this ETOPS crap that it keeps talking about? And that's what it is. It basically means you're far away from a piece of pavement that you can land on. And you have the ability to lose one engine and to fly for several minutes. It really depends on what your aircraft is certified to. It could be ETOPS 120, meaning you can be 120 minutes away, or you can be ETOPS 180, which is 3 hours away or 180 minutes away from a piece of pavement. All depends on what your company is certified for. If you're not certified for ETOPS, I'm sorry, you can't really go that far outside the U.S., but if you are certified for ETOPS, you're at least somewhat familiar with it. I can do a whole nother thing on ETOPS and what goes into it and stuff like that. But for now, let's just continue on with the fuel. But the reason I say that ETOPS is the only time this comes in as a consideration for your cross-feed valves, in this particular case, if I have two cross-feed valves, the two cross-feed valves allow me to not do a step generally. Typically, company policy, if you have two cross-feed valves, you don't need to test them before going into the ETOPS area. If you only have a single cross-feed valve, you have to at least test it to make sure that it works. That way, if you need it when you're in the ETOPS area, then it's good, and you know that it's good. But if you have two of them, I guess it's one of those things where they think, well, it has redundancy built into it. So there's that. But yeah. Okay. So that's just a quick rundown of the controls. Now let's take a look at some of the lights that are on those controls. So the lights are going to be pressure lights and valve lights and a fuel config. Notice there are main pump pressure lights that are going to be on there. Those pressure lights are low pump pressure. That's pretty self-explanatory, right? Most of any of these, when you see a pressure light, it's never a good thing. It usually means that it's low pressure, unless we're talking about the rat. But we're not. We're talking about fuel pumps. Now, we start talking about center tank pumps. Center tank pumps have pressure lights as well. And the pressure lights on the center tank pumps are a little bit different than the main tank pressure lights. And the reason I say they're different, if we think about how we operate the panel itself. If I take off with a full fuel load, then all of my pumps are on and running. My center pumps are on, my main tank pumps are on, everything's running, and that's golden. I run out of center tank fuel first, and I'll talk about why in just a second, but I'll run out of center tank fuel first, and when that happens, what do I do with those pump switches? Right, I turn them off. So when I turn them off, it is a normal condition for the center tank pumps to be off. Therefore, the pressure lights will not illuminate. They are inhibited to illuminate whenever the center tank pumps are turned off. Because it's normal. It can be normal. And Boeing has this whole thing about a dark cockpit concept where they don't want lights on that shouldn't be on when it's a normal condition. And that's one of them. So the main tank pumps, however, if I turn them off, well, that's never a normal situation. And I say never a normal situation because anytime I'm turning those pumps off, it's usually a non-normal. Whether it's to balance my tanks, whether it's because I have a lost engine, whether it's because I have lost fuel pumps, something that I'm turning those pumps off, that is never a normal situation. It's always a non-normal. Then we have the valve lights. Valve lights for this are no different than what they are for the entirety of the panel. They either say that the damn thing is in transition or that it's out of the commanded position. So if I say that the cross-feed valves have to be open, and I push the buttons, and they're supposed to open, and they don't, well, why would that happen? It would happen because the pump or the valve failed. So, and when it doesn't, what that means is that light will turn on. That light will come on saying, hey, look at me, there's something wrong. The valve is not in the correct position. It's not in the commanded position, whatever. The other side of that is it could be what's called an in transition or an in transition light, basically meaning that the valve is moving. And then, because it's not in the commanded position until it moves to the commanded position. So the valve light comes on temporarily. So the way to know is if I hit the switches, the valve lights come on and they stay on. All right, something's broke. Something's not where it's supposed to be. If the valve light comes on and then extinguishes, now I know that the valve actually moved. And that, when it moved, now it's in the correct position. That's why the light extinguishes. Again, if you can't remember any of the stuff that I'm saying right now, because I don't know, for me it's 11 o'clock at night and you're just kind of like, I'm done, I don't want to hear this anymore, you can always look at the notes in this PowerPoint that I have provided on the Google Docs, and you can download it from there and read all the notes that are in it. Okay, so if we start taking a look at normal fueling from just the left and the right tanks, okay, we can look here and we can see that, oh, look, I've got my normal main tanks that are running here in the right side, my normal main tanks that are running in the right side or left side, and they're running to feed their respective engines. Okay, here's my cross feed valve right here in the middle. So what you can see is I've got right tank feeding right engine, left tank feeding left engine. I've got a cross feed valve that can allow the right main to feed not only my right engine but my left engine, and vice versa. What I cannot do is I cannot transfer fuel from right tank to left tank, or left tank to center, or right tank to center, or vice versa. Okay. There is no transfer of fuel in this airplane. Everything has to go from the tank to the engine. That's all it can do. Now, one thing you'll notice on this diagram is it does show where the power comes from for these particular pumps. And what you'll see is you'll see a ground service AC, a left AC in the left side, and then you have left AC and right AC on the right side. Now, if you missed it in my electrics brief that I talk about, is ground service AC is ran by the right AC system. So when I see ground service AC, that tells me that the right AC is running my left forward, right AC is running my right aft. My left AC is running my left aft, my left AC is running my left forward. What does this mean? Why is this important? So, let's say I'm flying along, fat, dumb, and happy, and I'm like, ooh, everything's going great, until I lose an electrical system for whatever reason, whether I've lost a generator, whether I've lost a breaker, whether I've lost a bus, whatever you want to call it. This tells me that as long as I have the other side still available, meaning left AC or right AC respectively, that I will still have one pump in each tank that will be able to provide fuel to the respective engine. Okay. Now, the other side of this. Let's say I lose complete electrical. If I lose complete electrical, I do have these right here. These are check valves. And then this is a suction feed. That's what that's for. I don't really mention this in the PowerPoint. I do apologize for that because it doesn't happen that often. Suction feeding on these engines should be a no-brainer. It should happen. If there's no other way to get fuel, it should automatically occur. However, high power settings, high angles, whether it be bank angles, whether it be pitch angles, whatever, can cause difficulty for it to suction feed. So don't just assume that if I don't have pumps that it's going to suction feed, because it may or may not suction feed. So just remember that. So anyway, this is normal fueling with the left and right tanks feeding the engines, meaning that I have no center tank fuel. Now, if I look at what happens when I have center tank fuel. So, have center tank fuel, I have to burn it first. And we'll talk about that in just a minute as to why. It's basically for structural integrity, but I'll explain it a little bit better in a second. But the center tank pumps have to operate first to burn out that fuel. So what happens? Well, they override the left and right main tank pumps. So I have my left and right mains feeding, and we're looking at that here. So left and right main tanks are feeding perfectly fine. I turn on my center tank pumps, and this is what it looks like. Because the center tank pumps operate at approximately double the pressure of my main tank pumps. And remember this, numbers don't matter, but it's about 15 psi for the main tanks and 30 psi for the center tanks. Does that matter to you if you're a pilot trying to learn this airplane? Not really. Biggest thing for you to remember is that it's double the pressure, or approximately double the pressure. Therefore, the center tank pumps are considered override pumps. Being override pumps is really the biggest thing to remember here. Now, notice that they are provided power from the left and right AC, respectively, to the left center tank and the right center tank pump. So they are located there. And you'll notice that it's feeding both engines. Once the center tank would run out and the pumps had been turned off, then my right and left main tanks would take over. Actually, wouldn't even have to turn the center tank pumps off. You would just have to simply lose pressure in the center tank pumps for the left and right ACs, left and right tanks, to take over and provide that fuel pressure. Now, let's say that I go out to a cold, dark airplane. I don't have a power card. I don't have anything like that, so I have to start the APU. Well, how can I start the APU if I don't have AC power on the airplane? Because everything here tells me that I need AC power. I need AC power here. I need AC power here, here, and here. So how do I do it? Right here, you'll notice this pump right here. This extra little pump in the left main tank says battery bus. Now, the important thing to remember here is I have to turn on my battery bus to be able to get this thing to run. See my electrics brief. But when it does run, this is what happens. So I come out to a cold, dark airplane. I go through my safety checks and whatever. I hit my battery power switch on. Then I go to start my APU. When I go to start the APU, that DC pump turns on and starts to run and provide fuel to the APU. And it will continue to burn until AC power is added to the airplane. Once AC power is available and added to the airplane, what ends up happening is my left forward AC pump ends up taking over. When it ends up taking over, there is no way to turn this pump off. I can push that switch all day long and nothing will happen as long as that APU is requesting fuel and does not have a shutdown signal. Okay? So, basically, the APU is somewhat self-sustained when it comes to fuel, because it can either get it from the battery bus through the DC pump, or it can get it through my left AC or right AC through the ground service when AC power is actually applied to the airplane. Either way, the APU will get its fuel. Okay, so another light that was on that panel is the fuel config. The fuel config light is one of those things where it has multiple reasons that it turns on. As you can see here, there's 3 reasons for it to illuminate. It could be an imbalance, it could be low fuel, and it could be the center pumps off with less than 1,200 pounds of fuel in the center tank. Okay. Now, obviously, imbalance and low fuel, those are pretty generic terms, because imbalance could be anything. It could be an imbalance of 1 pound, 2 pounds, 1,000 pounds, 1,500 pounds, whatever. That's not what we're talking about. There is a sliding scale. Generally, it is put into the performance part of your QRH. Again, follow your company policy, follow your company manuals for where this is located, if you even have it. As pilots that are trying to learn this airplane, or hell, just people that want a general understanding of it, the imbalance is very simple. It is 2,000 pounds plus or minus 500, meaning that the range for an imbalance can be between 1,500 pounds and 2,500 pounds. That's your range, 15 to 25. The reason that varies so much is because it's all determined upon weight. How much fuel do you have? How heavy is the airplane? The heavier the airplane, the smaller that variance can be. The smaller that imbalance can be. Now, Boeing will say that the airplane will fly straight if one tank is empty and one tank is 100% full. Feel free to be a freaking test pilot and try and do that. But the point is that it's not necessarily an in-flight limitation as much as it is an structural limitation when the airplane is actually on the ground. Because if you think about it, you have one wing that's completely full or just a lot heavier than the left wing. If the right wing is heavier than the left wing heavier than the right wing, whatever. When you're making turns, what that does to your landing gear and how much pressure that puts on the landing gear and those struts, and it's sitting there and it's just cranking down on it when it's that much heavier. So it's really more of a structural thing on the ground versus a flyability or controllability issue in flight. Now, low fuel, I would like to think this one is self-explanatory, but there is a number associated with it. Low fuel, you get a message on ICAS that comes up and says low fuel. And when that happens, the fuel config light will come on. And basically what this is saying is that you have less than 2,200 pounds in either main tank. So 2,200 pounds, either main tank, low fuel. 15 to 2,500 pound imbalance between the main tanks. That's your imbalance. That third one, that one I pretty much wrote the reason. If you have greater than, I put less than, didn't I? I'll fix that before I post it. Greater than 1,200 pounds of fuel in the center tank and my pumps are off, then the fuel config light comes on. Now, the reason they say that it's 1,200 pounds and the center pump's off, that's because you're supposed to burn all the center tank fuel first before you start burning wings. Now, this is, again, it's more of a structural thing. Trying to think. Let's see if we look at it something like this: airplane fuel in all the tanks. You have we'll say the green arrows represent weight. Okay, so you have weight in all parts of the airplane, pushing it down while it's trying to stay away from the ground. So you have weight versus lift, right? We're just talking about the four forces of aerodynamics. And again, if you're looking at this, you either don't care about the four forces of aerodynamics, or you're a pilot that's far enough along in your career where you've been beat over the head with that. So I'm not going to go into that so much. Just talking simply about why it's a good idea, or why they recommend or say or give a policy that says you will burn center tank fuel first. Because if we look at this, okay, cool, I got fuel in every tank, all the weight's getting pushed down in that direction. Okay, so then I burn center tank fuel like I'm supposed to. So now my center tank would essentially be trying to push up, but I have all this additional weight on my wings that's keeping it down, right? Now, if we do it the opposite way, so I burn wing tank fuel first, and I keep my center tank fuel. Well, my center tank, it can hold 80,000 pounds approximately. It's like 79,000 and some change, but we'll just say 80,000 pounds for easy math, right? So 80,000 pounds can be held in the middle of this thing, and it's pushing down, pushing down, pushing down. My wings are empty. So all I have is the weight of the sheet metal and the composite material and the engines out there. So you can imagine, and I'm terrible at animating this on PowerPoint, but if you look like this, and all of a sudden my wings start to get that additional pressure on them, right? Because my center is trying to pull it down, and my wings just don't have the weight anymore. So I'm putting all this undue stress on the wing roots. Again, it's not necessarily. I'm not saying that if I burn the center tank, or if I don't burn the center tank and I burn the wings first, that the airplane is just going to fold up. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that you're putting undue stress on an aircraft that's already kind of old and beat up to begin with. Especially when you're getting into some of these cargo airplanes where they already have 95, 100,000 hours with who knows how many cycles on them. The least amount of stress that you can give them, the better. So, just want to throw that out. Now, the other thing that your fuel system is going to have, or could have, I should say, could be a fuel jettison system. Fuel jettison systems are one of those things where they're helpful, kinda, but in my opinion, they don't really do enough for it to matter. And let me explain that. Fuel jettison systems have nozzles at the end of each wing. They're, probably yay long, foot and a half long, something like that. And yeah, they can get rid of a good bit of fuel in a short amount of time. However, they can only get rid of 2,600 pounds per minute. And I say only because it's 2,600 pounds per minute for a tank that's 80,000 pounds, because it all comes from the center tank. So if the center tank's 100% full and it's 80,000 pounds, and I do 2,600 pounds per minute, let me just do some quick math here, and I can look and tell you how many minutes that is. So 80,000 divided by 2,600. That's a half hour. A half hour to empty my center tank. Now, when would I want to use fuel jettison, do you think? Probably when I am heavy and I'm trying to stay away from the ground by lightening lightening up myself, which 2,600 pounds a minute, sure, that will lighten you up. Will it lighten you up enough? Again, this is one of those things. Fuel jettison is one of those better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it kind of things. I would rather have it, turn it on, and just see what I can do with it and hopefully get away from the ground or stay away from the ground than to not have it, not be able to jettison, and I'm too heavy to stay in flight. So, that's however you want to look at it, to be honest. Obviously, if you're in a non-normal where you're over landing weight, you're over the max landing weight, and ATC gives you the clearance, then that could be a way to get under your landing weight to be able to land where it's kind of a non-emergent situation. And rather than spending 6 or 7 hours burning off that fuel, you can just dump it. And that's fine too. However, that seems to be kind of rare inside the United States. I'll admit, as a 135 boom operator, I dump fuel quite often. I say quite often. It felt a lot. It felt like it was a lot, but it probably wasn't. I probably dumped fuel in 10 years. I probably dumped fuel maybe 6 times. And each time it was to make landing weight to be able to land the airplane. But it was a little bit different on that airplane. It could dump at 6,500 pounds a minute, and I had a boom on the back that I could draw my name in the sky. Like it was just different. But I also know that 4,000 feet is about the height that you need to be at least above the ground for that fuel to be able to atomize. If you're below that and you dump fuel, say low altitude over a school, there is a possibility that the fuel could hit the ground or hit people that's on the ground. And that's not really what we're trying to do. So just be cognizant of that. That you need to at least be high enough away from the ground to be able for the fuel to atomize. If not, you're going to be causing kind of an EPA problem. Ironically, this would be the one time where chemtrails were true. Anyway, looking at the lights and the switches. So the switches are relatively easy. There's only 3 of them. I can turn on the nozzles or open them, and I can turn the pumps on. So this turns the entire system on. This opens up the nozzles to be able to spray the fuel out of the nozzles. Again, left wing, right wing. It's pretty self-explanatory. On, that's pretty self-explanatory. Valve lights. This just tells me one of the valves aren't in the commanded position. Either they didn't close when I told them to close, didn't open when I told them to open. Associated with the valve lights are going to be the fault light. That fault light's also going to say that the valves aren't in position. It is also going to tell me when the pumps aren't working. So if the pumps didn't work, didn't turn off when I told them to turn off, didn't turn on when I told them to turn on, I'll get a fault light telling me that there's a problem. So, it's a pretty generic system. It's pretty easy. There's not a whole lot of things that are in it. What I will say, there's 2 Jettison pumps, and they share the same housing as the center tank pumps, meaning that they're in the same location, but they're 2 separate pumps. So I got my center tank pumps and I got my Jettison pumps. They're 2 completely separate pumps, but they're in the same housing, so they share a common housing. But it is a different system. It is not your center tank pumps that are pumping out your Jettison fuel. All right, now if we look at the indicators or the quantity numbers here that's on our panel. This is located underneath the controls, underneath those switches. You'll see these located there. You'll see you have left, center, and right, and then a total fuel quantity. These are numbers that are given to you by probes that are throughout the airplane, with the exception of the total quantity. The total quantity is not necessarily taking all the fuel probe numbers and adding it up and saying, yep, that's what it is. most of the time it's going to match. However, the total quantity actually comes from a separate fuel calculation that comes from the fuel quantity processor, or the FQP. Basically, all the information from the airplane goes into that FQP, and it does some math that is way beyond my knowledge, and basically accounts for temperature, altitude, pressure, altitude, all that kind of stuff, and says, here's your quantity. And that's where that number comes from. So, biggest thing is, if someone ever asks you where total quantity comes from, fuel quantity processor. Okay, 3 words, it's real easy. Beside there, I've got my fuel temperature. That's in degrees Celsius. There are 2 numbers that we concern ourselves with when it comes to the fuel temperature. There are some limitations that come along with the fuel temperature. We have a low temp, and we have a max temp. So the low temp, or the lowest temperature limitation, is 3 degrees Celsius above the freezing point of the fuel being used. Now, what does that mean? It would all depend on what the fuel you're using is. There's some fuel that has a negative 43. There's some fuel that has a negative 45. There's some fuel that has a negative 48. You just gotta, you have to either consult your manual, ask your fueler, something like that, to be able to get the freezing point of that fuel being used. Generally, if it's TS or not TS, that's back in Afghanistan days. TS1, that's a whole nother thing. What we use in the States is either Jet A or Jet A1. That's generally 45-ish, negative 45 to negative 48 is usually the freezing point, somewhere around there. So 3 degrees above that. The max temperature is 49 degrees Celsius. So 49 degrees Celsius is hot. That's really hot. That's a lot hotter than, what England says is hot right now. But 49 degrees C. If you're somewhere where your fuel is 49 degrees C, I don't want to be there. But that's just me. So 49 degrees C is your high temperature limit. There are some things that you can do, not necessarily to cool the fuel, but there are some things you can do to warm up the fuel. To warm it up, you can go to a lower altitude, because we all know the adiabatic lapse rate is 2 degrees C per 1,000 feet as we climb. So I can gain 2 degrees C every 1,000 feet that I descend. Or I can speed up. I like that option. But the airplane can't go that fast. But for every 0.01 a Mach, you can get like 1 degree or something crazy. And that's simply because of friction. And I could be off on the numbers, so don't quote me. It's just, I know that for every so much of Mach, you can get so much in temperature. Again, generally it's listed in your QRH. I don't have a QRH in front of me, so I can't look it up for you. If you're really curious to know and you don't have access to a QRH, let me know and I can look it up and get back to you. Now, the question that comes up a lot is I say a lot. I ask the questions usually most of the time. So the question I ask a lot is, where does the fuel temperature come from? Well, I just know that it comes from the left tank, because that's what Boeing says. It comes from the left tank. But let's think about why it would come from the left tank. So we have hydraulic coolers that are inside the aircraft, and this is something that I'm going to cover a little bit more in depth with some of the systems. I did a quick overview of the hydraulic systems. I didn't really include this too much, but it's one of those things that you talk about something and you forget about it, and you talk about something else and you remember it, and that's kind of what I just did. I remembered that I have hydraulic coolers in my fuel, and the hydraulic coolers in the fuel are to do 2 things. It's to cool my hydraulic fluid, and it's to warm my fuel. I only have 3 hydraulic systems, so how can I evenly disperse them? Well, my thinking would be I'd put 1 in each tank, because I got 3 tanks. No, Boeing didn't do that, of course. They did 2 in the right tank and 1 in the left tank. So because I have 2 hydraulic heat exchangers in the right side, they assume that that temperature is going to be higher than what it will be in the left tank. The left tank will be the cold tank because it only has 1 heat exchanger versus 2. Now, with that being said, that's where the temperature is taken from because it is assumed to be the coldest tank. If you have ever flown the 7.5 or are ever interested in learning the 7.5, it's the exact opposite of the 7.5. There's 2 in the left wing, 1 in the right wing, and why they did that, I don't know. But they did enough differences between the 7.5 and 7.6 to make it really annoying, but not so much to make it a different type rating. But anyway, so hydraulic coolers are why the temperature is taken in the left wing. There are 2 in the right wing, 1 in the left wing, so it's assumed to be colder. All right. Now, this is how much the aircraft can hold. If you're coming from, let's say you're coming from a 7.3 into a 7.6. 7.3s can hold somewhere around, 40,000 pounds of fuel, depending on the variation. This is for a 300, by the way. This is a 7.6 300. The 7.6 200 isn't quite this much. 7.6 200 is a little bit less. But the 300 can hold 79,730 pounds in the center tank. So it can hold just about twice as much fuel in the center tank as a 7.3 can hold in it completely. So if you're coming from a smaller airplane into this airplane, it is quite a difference when you get into weight and how much things weigh. Left, right, main tanks can hold 40,267 pounds for a total of 160,264 pounds. Obviously, most of the time, these airplanes aren't loaded to that capacity. Plus, with their age and stuff, I don't know if I'd want to go to that capacity. But I mean, it's nothing to see 110, 120, 130,000 pound fuel loads when you're talking about going overseas. Because again, this airplane burns roughly 10,000 pounds, 8 to 10,000 pounds per hour. So 80 to 100,000 pounds for a 10-hour flight. Yeah, going over the ocean, you need quite a bit of fuel. Now, there's this little note here, talks about if you have a winglet equipped aircraft, your total capacity is reduced by 17 gallons or 64 liters. Okay, 17 gallons by 6.7 pounds. We're talking about 80 pounds that we're really talking about. When you're talking about 160,000 pounds, 80 pounds really doesn't sound like a lot. But yeah. Okay, so there's son of a. That's supposed to say fuel systems. That says discrete lights. That's my mistake. I totally forgot to update that. I will update that though before I post that to the Google Docs. The Google Docs is going to be listed in the description below. And then, as always, please like, share, subscribe, whatever you can do to help get this out and for people to see. This is just one of those things where I love doing this and I love teaching. So the more people I can teach, the more people I can help, the better I feel, and the more I feel like I've accomplished. So anytime I can do that is a great feeling. All right, so now that we've made it to the end of the video, I don't know if you paid attention, but my hat right in this area here, and this area here, this is the QR code that leads you to my Facebook. This is the YouTube. This is obviously my logo. So these will be available soon, hopefully. This is just a prototype, so the QR code doesn't actually work right now. But there is a Facebook, there is this YouTube channel, and then there's some other stuff in the description with the Google Docs and that kind of stuff that's on there. Again, every little bit helps, so I appreciate you being around, sticking around this long, hitting that like and share and subscribe, and then that notification bell. That way you get notified when I make new videos, and you get to see me look foolish for putting on discrete lights at the end of the freaking thing instead of changing that one word to fuel systems, or two words to fuel systems instead of discrete lights. I will say it's 11:52, so that could be part of it. Outside of that, I hope you guys have a great night, great weekend, great morning, afternoon, evening, whatever it is for you. And we'll see you on the next one. Bye.